Beach week begins, my homies, with the Pearl. Chapter 1. In the town, they tell the story of the great Pearl, how it was found and how it was lost again. They tell of Kino, the fisherman, and his wife, Juana, and of the baby, Coyotito. And because the story has been told so often, it has taken root in every man's mind. And as with all retold tales that are in people's hearts, there are only good and bad things, and black and white things, and good and evil things, and no in between anywhere. That right there would help me on my Of Mice and Men essay. If this story is a parable, perhaps everyone takes his own meaning from it and reads his own life into it. In any case, they say in the town that Kino awakened in the near dark. The stars still shone, and the day had drawn only a pale wash of light in the lower sky to the east. The roosters had been crowing for some time, and the early pigs were already beginning their ceaseless turning of twigs and bits of wood to see whether anything to eat had been overlooked. Outside the brush house in the tuna clump, a covey of little birds chittered and flurried with their wings. Kino's eyes opened, and he looked first at the lightning square, which was the door, and then he looked at the hanging box where Coyotito slept. And last, he turned his head to Juana, his wife, who lay beside him on the mat, her blue head shawl over her nose, and over her breasts, and around the small of her back. Juana's eyes were open too. Kino could never remember seeing them closed when he awakened. Her dark eyes made little reflected stars. She was looking at him, as she always was looking at him when he awakened. Kino heard the little splash of morning waves on the beach. It was a very good. Kino closed his eyes again to listen to this music. Perhaps he alone did this, and perhaps all of his people did it. His people had once been great makers of songs, so that everything they saw or thought or did or heard became a song. That was very long ago. The songs remained. Kino knew them, but no new songs were added. That does not mean that there were no personal songs. In Kino's head, there was a song now, clear and soft, and if he had been able to speak it, he would have called it the Song of the Family. His blanket was over his nose to protect him from the dank air. His eyes flicked to a rustle beside him. It was Juana arising, almost soundlessly. On her hard, bare feet, she went to the hanging box where Coyotito slept, and she leaned over and said a little reassuring word. Coyotito looked up for a moment and closed his eyes and slept again. Juana went to the fire pit and uncovered a coal and fanned it alive while she broke little pieces of brush over it. Now Kino got up and wrapped his blanket about his head and nose and shoulders. He slipped his feet into his sandals and went out to watch the dawn. Outside the door, he squatted down and gathered the blanket ends about his knees. He saw the specks of Gulf clouds flame high in the air, and a goat came near and sniffed at him and stared with its cold yellow eyes. Behind him, Juana's fire leaped into flame and threw spears of light through the chinks of the brush house wall and through a wavering square of light out the door. A late moth blustered in to find the fire. The song of the family came now from behind Kino, and the rhythm of the family song was the grinding stone where Juana worked the corn for the morning cakes. So you grind your corn into what's called matzah, and then the masa is what's used as a base, kind of like flour, but it's used to make corn tortillas. The dawn came quickly now, a wash, a glow of lightness, and then an explosion of fire as the sun arose out of the gulf. Kino looked down to cover his eyes from the glare. He could hear the pat of the corn cakes in the house and the rich smell of them on the cooking plate. The ants were busy on the ground, big black ones with shiny bodies and little dusty, quick ants. Kino watched with the detachment of God, while a dusty ant frantically tried to escape the sand trap an ant lion had dug for him. A thin, timid dog came close and, at a soft word from Kino, curled up, arranged its tail neatly over its feet, and laid its chin delicately on the pile. It was a black dog with yellow gold spots where its eyebrows should have been. It was a morning like other mornings, and yet perfect among mornings. What a beautiful sentence. How was your day, Taigen? Well, it was a morning like other mornings, and yet perfect among mornings. Kino heard the creak of the rope when Juana took Cayotito out of the hanging box and cleaned him and hammocked him in her shawl in a loop that placed him close to her breast. Kino could see these things without looking at them. Juana sang softly an ancient song that had only 3 notes and yet endless variety of interval. And this was part of the family song too. It was all part. Sometimes it rose to an aching chord that caught the throat, saying this is safety, this is warmth, this is the whole. Across the brush fence. I bet you we all have family songs, don't we? If we just took the time to listen to them. Across the brush fence were the other brush houses, and the smoke came from them too, and the sound of breakfast, but those were other songs. Their pigs were other pigs. Their wives were not Juana. Kino was young and strong, and his black hair hung over his brown forehead. His eyes were warm and fierce and bright, and his mustache was thin and coarse. He lowered his blanket from his nose now, for the dark, poisonous air was gone, and the yellow sunlight fell on the house. Near the brush fence, 2 roosters bowed and feinted at each other with squared wings and neck feathers roughed out. It would be a clumsy fight. They were not game chickens. Kino watched them for a moment, and then his eyes went up to a flight of wild doves twinkling inland to the hills. The world was awake now, and Kino arose and went into his brush house. As he came through the door, Juana stood up from the glowing fire pit. She put Cayotito back in his hanging box, and then she combed her black hair and braided it in 2 braids and tied the ends with thin green ribbons. Kino squatted by the fire pit and rolled a hot corn cake and dipped it in sauce and ate it. And he drank a little pulque. I think it's pulque. It's a, I think Mexican, but maybe I should say Hispanic alcoholic drink. And that was breakfast. That was the only breakfast he had ever known outside of feast days, and one incredible fiesta on cookies that had nearly killed him. When Kino had finished, Juana came back to the fire and ate her breakfast. They had spoken once, but there was no need for speech if it is only a habit anyway. Kino sighed with satisfaction, and that was conversation. I love that sentence too. It reminds me of Pulp Fiction when Uma Thurman is at Jackrabbit Slim's and she tells Vincent that there can be comfortable silence in a good relationship. They had spoken once, but there was no need for speech if it is only habit anyway. Like, just shut up and listen for once, basically. Or just shut up and just enjoy each other's company in silence. Like, if you're in a good relationship, shouldn't silence be just as good as good conversation? The sun was warming the brush house, breaking through its crevices and long streaks, and one of the streaks fell on the hanging box where Cayotito lay, and on the ropes that held it. It was a tiny movement that drew their eyes to the hanging box. Kino and Juana froze in their positions. Down the rope that hung the baby's box from the roof support, a scorpion moved slowly. His stinging tail was straight out behind him, but he could whip it up in a flash of time. Kino's breath whistled through his nostrils, and he opened his mouth to stop it. And then the startled look was gone from him, and the rigidity from his body. In his mind, a new song had come, the song of evil, the music of the enemy, of any foe of the family, a savage, secret, dangerous melody, and underneath, the song of the family cried plaintively. The scorpion moved delicately down the rope toward the box. Underneath her breath, Juana repeated an ancient magic to guard against such evil. And on top of that, she muttered, a Hail Mary, Catholics, between clenched teeth. But Kino was in motion. His body glided quietly across the room, noiselessly and smoothly. His hands were in front of him, palms down, and his eyes were on the scorpion. Beneath it, in the hanging box, Cayotito laughed and reached up his hand toward it. It sensed danger. When Kino was almost within reach of it, it stopped and its tail rose up over its back in little jerks, and the curved thorn on the tail's end glistened. Kino stood perfectly still. He could hear Juana whispering the old magic again, and he could hear the evil music of the enemy. He could not move until the scorpion moved, and it felt for the source of the death that was coming to it. Kino's hand went forward very slowly, very smoothly. The thorn tail jerked upright, and at that moment, the laughing Cayetito shook the rope, and the scorpion fell. Kino's hand leaped to catch it, but it fell past his fingers, fell on the baby's shoulder, landed, and struck. Then, snarling, Kino had it in his fingers, rubbing it into a paste in his hands. He threw it down and beat it into the earth floor with his fist. And Cayetito screamed with pain in his box, but Kino beat and stamped the enemy until it was only a fragment in a moist place in the dirt. His teeth were bared, and fury flared in his eyes, and the song of the enemy roared in his ears. But Juana had the baby in her arms now. She found the puncture with redness starting from it already. She put her lips down over the puncture and sucked hard and spat and sucked again while Cayetito screamed. Kino hovered. He was helpless. He was in the way. The screams of the baby brought the neighbors. Out of the brush house as they poured, Kino's brother Juan Thomas and his fat wife Apollonia and their 4 children crowded in the door and blocked the entrance, while behind them others tried to look in, and one small boy crawled among legs to have a look. And those in front passed the word back to those behind. "Scorpion, the baby has been stung." Juana stopped sucking the puncture for a moment. The little hole was slightly enlarged and its edges whitened from the sucking, but the red swelling extended farther around it in a hard lymphatic mound. And all these people knew about the scorpion. An adult might be very ill from the sting, but a baby could easily die from the poison. First, they knew would come swelling and fever and a tightened throat, and then cramps in the stomach. And then Cayetito might die if enough of the poison had gone in, but the stinging pain of the bite was going away. Cayetito's screams turned to moans. Kino had wondered often at the iron in his patient, fragile wife. She, who was obedient and respectful and cheerful and patient, she could arch her back in child pain with hardly a cry. She could stand fatigue and hunger almost better than Kino himself. In the canoe, she was like a strong man, and now she did the most surprising thing. "The doctor," she said. "Go to get the doctor." The word was passed out among the neighbors where they stood close packed in the little yard behind the brush fence, and they repeated among themselves, "Juana wants a doctor." A wonderful thing, a memorable thing. To want the doctor, to get him would be a remarkable thing. The doctor never came to the cluster of brush houses. Why should he, when he had more than he could do to take care of the rich people who lived in the stone and plaster houses of the town? "He would not come," the people in the yard said. "He would not come," the people in the door said. And the thought got into Kino. "The doctor would not come," Kino said to Juana. She looked up at him, her eyes as cold as the eyes of a lioness. This was Juana's first baby. This was nearly everything there was in Juana's world. And Kino saw her determination, and the music of the family sounded in his head with a steely tone. "Then we will go to him," Juana said. And with one hand she arranged her dark blue shawl over her head and made of one end of it a sling to hold the moaning baby, and made of the other end of it a shade over his eyes to protect him from the light. The people in the door pushed against those behind to let her through. Kino followed her. They went out of the gate to the rutted path, and the neighbors followed them. The thing had become a neighborhood affair. They made a quick, soft-footed procession into the center of the town. First Juana and Kino, and behind them Juan Thomas and Apollonia, her big stomach jiggling with the strenuous pace. Then all the neighbors with their children trotting on their flanks, and the yellow sun threw their black shadows ahead of them so that they walked on their own shadows. They came to a place where the brush houses stopped and the city of stone and plaster began, the city of harsh outer walls and inner cool gardens where little water played, and the bougainvillea, crusted tropical plant, crusted the walls with purple and brick red and white. They heard from the secret gardens the singing of caged birds and heard the splash of cooling water on hot flagstones. The procession crossed the blinding plaza and passed in front of the church. It had grown now, and on the outskirts the hurrying newcomers were being softly informed how the baby had been stung by a scorpion, how the father and mother were taking it to the doctor.